Into the Russ Joy Show. I'm Russ Joy. You knew that because you're smart. It's also the name of the show. And we're already off to quite the start. There's no logo in the corner, and I am the one to blame. The banner on the bottom isn't up yet, but now it is, and I am to blame. The show is late this morning, but let's be honest. We just know that at this point, I run on Russ Joy time. The time that this show begins can vary, but what doesn't change is the passion and the love for each and every one of you out there over on YouTube, X, Facebook, and Twitter, even though X is Twitter. But good morning to everybody, because today is a day that we need to have a conversation about. 3 teams in town. We're going to omit one of them because that team happens to be inactive. There are actually 2 teams that are inactive, right? Because it's the Phillies and the Union. But there are 3 teams that are actively in action. And I have to tell you guys, I've taken some more time. I went back and I checked out what happened over the weekend with the Eagles game. And I actually felt for the first time that the Eagles have rounded a corner. And I know it's very bold to say. I know that it might seem kind of crazy. And I've been very, very critical of this team this season. And I've been very, very critical of the head coach. But I have to tell you, for once, I actually do think the Eagles might actually be okay. The Eagles might actually survive this. The Eagles might actually somehow, some way, pull the nose up on this thing. And I think it's just because of the talent. And we talked about this for a few weeks now. I don't think that the head coach has a full grasp on how to be a head coach in the National Football League, but I do think that the talent is there. I still think that this roster had some holes going into the season, but what we've begun to see is a ton of young players who just have figured it out. A bunch of young guys who have figured out how to make meaningful contributions to this team to start the season. And if there's no other reason that you should feel good about the Eagles coming out of an absolute decimation of the Cincinnati Bengals, it should be that. It should be the fact that this defense that was much maligned to start the season has now started to put it together. It should be that Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean have kind of figured out a way, despite the fact that they're rookies, to be meaningful players in a secondary that all of a sudden looks very, very dangerous. A secondary that, by the way, has kind of had the return of, we've been calling him Darius. We took away big play. We say can't be big play. Can't be big play slay if you don't make big plays. He had a pretty big play on Sunday in the end zone, costing the Bengals a touchdown that hit the receiver right in the hands. He was getting ready to bring it down. And Slay made a pretty big play. A pretty big play. And so we feel good about that. And you should feel good about that if you're an Eagles fan this morning. Because I went back and I rewatched part of the game yesterday, and I wanted to make sure that I missed things. Because sometimes on a Sunday, I sit down with all the children, and we watch the game together, and some of them have better attention spans than others. But I was like, you know what? Today's going to be a day that I'm just going to sit back. Let's take this game one more time and just see, with a clear head, without having anybody hang off me, let's get a clear idea. Let's get a clear understanding of what it is that we saw. And I felt even better. I felt even better on the rewatch, watching what the defense was able to do to Joe Burrow. Now, I talked about this on Monday's Crossing broadcast, but there were some plays to be made early in that game that just didn't happen for the Bengals. And it could have been a much tighter final score. Like, there was a path potentially to the Bengals making this one a whole lot more interesting than they did. But ultimately, that Eagles defense, despite the fact that they only put up 1 sack on the day, they made Joe Burrow's life a living hell. And they ultimately it created enough pressure on him to throw off his timing and to allow for that ever-improving secondary to figure things out. The maybe most positive thing you could take out of that game, other than the young guys, it's the reemergence of the vets that you thought were going to be, important for this team. We talked about a little bit ago. Darius Slay, Little Play Slay. We'll call him Little Play Slay right now. He's getting closer to getting his nickname back. Little Play Slay had a big moment. The biggest play was what happened when Rodgers tipped the ball to CJ And CJ was the guy who went absolutely bananas. The man creates a massive turnover in that game, and we all feel good about it in the aftermath. Now, I do want to tell you that while I was very impressed with the defense, and I spent Monday's show really talking a lot about the defense, on rewatch, I felt significantly better about the offense on a rewatch. Because that, to me, was the moment that I went, okay, I knew that Jalen Hurts had a very good game and had a very efficient game. I knew that Jalen Hurts went 16 of 20, but I wanted to know, I needed to know, could he figure it out? Like, how impactful were the passes? How many of them were checkdowns? How many of them were plays that actually busted open the opposition? And I have to tell you that, like, going back and watching it, going back and seeing Jalen Hurts execute in short yardage situations and really spreading the ball around, passing that love around, I felt significantly better. Now, I will tell you, the thing that stood out to me on the rewatch was not just the distribution, not just the relatively even distribution between Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown, but it was also the way that he got Calcaterra involved in the game. It was also the way that he got Saquon Barkley over 100 yards. But the big takeaway is we saw a lot of Jalen Hurts under center, which all of a sudden started getting the wheels turning a little bit, started getting this brain in this massive old noggin here thinking a little bit. Did we just see for the first time the Kellen Moore influence on the offense? I mean, beyond the pre-snap motion that we saw from week one that we felt pretty darn good about. Like, did we finally start to see something that gave us the indication that Kellen Moore might have actually figured something out, might have been given a little bit more reins to the offense? Do we think it was a more collaborative effort? Do we think that it was something where maybe Nick Sirianni, Kellen Moore, Jalen Hurts, maybe even Saquon Barkley have a little conversation about what is it that we need to do here that's going to set this team up for success and sustained success? And I keep coming back to it. There was a whole clip that I took out of an episode a few weeks ago and popped up onto the YouTube channel. But like, it felt like for a long time, Nick Sirianni was just afraid to run the ball. It felt like he was afraid to hand the ball off to Saquon Barkley, to like build the early part of a game's offense on Saquon Barkley, which has made no sense to me. The man has been absolutely dominant in virtually every game. The explosiveness is there. Like, for all the fear that the Giants had, and the reason that they ultimately chose not to extend a massive contract, or at least a respectable one, to Saquon Barkley, is because they thought that he was on the wrong, he was too many years in. You're starting to get closer to 30. He's 27 now. And you start to think that, like, there's the law of diminishing returns. And he'd been given a lot of carries. There were a lot of miles on those legs. Barkley looks like he's turned back the clock. Like, he looks like the guy who came out of Penn State. He looks like the guy who took the NFL by storm. The explosiveness is there. That, to me, is like the most encouraging sign. And it wasn't just him, because I think for the first time, saw a legitimate return of the explosiveness of Jalen Hurts. Now, it wasn't everywhere, and it wasn't on every play, but there's the touchdown that he scores off the right side that you almost see him hit a gear that it looked like you visibly saw the rust falling off the car. Like, it actually looked like the MVP runner-up Jalen Hurts came to play in Cincinnati. Now, again, he only had 20 pass attempts. He had double-digit carries. He had 3 touchdowns by rushing, right? Most of those short yardage situations on the tush push. But like the acceleration being there is the thing that maybe gives you a little bit of hope. The speed coming back is maybe what gives you a little bit of hope. When you look at what made Jalen Hurts such an effective quarterback for this team, especially the year they made the Super Bowl run, it was because he was a legitimate dual threat. And being that dual threat was so much more than just Jalen Hurts being efficient enough through the air. It really was that, like, at any given time, if you gave him 3-4 yards of space and he got outside the pocket, like, he's rushing. And he's probably going to beat you to the sticks. But last year, we didn't see that much. Last year, it looked like he got hurt early in the season, took quite a few weeks to try to get back into form. Felt like late in the season, he kind of got back there, maybe tweaked it again. For the first time this entire season, I looked at this guy and said, that's the quarterback that we've all been waiting on. That's the guy that the people who believe in Jalen Hurts, I'm one of them, that the people who believe in Jalen Hurts have been waiting for. have been hoping isn't gone. I compare these two a lot, but like when you watch Joel Embiid, you know, in your heart of hearts, you know there is a 0% chance that he is ever going to return to the guy that he was his rookie season. He's never going to look like the player in his first or second year. He's never going to have that explosiveness. He's never going to have that lateral quickness. That player's gone, right? He's a lot bigger now. He's a stronger guy now. But he's also a lot heavier. He's a lot slower. He's a more plodding player now. And the big fear here was Jalen Hurts isn't old. Jalen Hurts hasn't had that many serious injuries. Jalen Hurts shouldn't look like a guy whose speed has been reduced by like 40%. So I took that out of that game. I went, all right, we know that he still has the strength in the lower body. The tush push is still effective. You have a rotating cast on the offensive line in the trenches, which maybe makes it a little bit harder for you to execute the tush push as a unit. Last year, the Eagles benefited a lot from having just a very healthy offensive line. And they also had, future first ballot Hall of Famer and Jason Kelce in the middle. But like, they still have an effective tush push. You sometimes now see them go for it on third down, so they give themselves 2 opportunities to execute, but it still works. It's still a viable option. And we did see that Jalen Hurts kind of took a little bit of a different path on one of those touchdowns, where he kind of actually physically rolled to the left of the pile and kind of took the path of least resistance. And that's fine too. And then you have this guy in the backfield, Saquon Barkley, who happens to be very strong, who's helping to push from behind. But Saquon Barkley is also like a guy that, if you are an opposing defensive coordinator, while you want to load up the box on the tush push, you also have to be cognizant of the fact that, like, if we do oversell it, if we really do push everybody in, all it's going to take is a Jalen Hurts push, turn, pitch, Saquon Barkley's gone. So there is like this other level to things now that you have to take into account if you are a defensive coordinator. Barkley, I said in the offseason, was going to be such a massive addition to this team, and it's not just for his own production. It's not only for the rushing yards he's going to put up. It's not just for the rushing touchdowns he's going to provide you with. It's everything else. It's the gravity that he has. It's the gravity that his presence in that backfield will have as a viable option for Jalen Hurts to go to at any time. He can be part of your passing game. He can block. Sometimes he misses a block, but he can block. He's a strong guy. He can catch a good screen for you. He can run a decent enough route underneath. But more importantly, as a defense, you can't cheat off of that backfield because you have 2 guys who can legitimately get to the outside and pick up a first down. That's a big difference from last year. And I like DeAndre Swift, but DeAndre Swift is no Saquon Barkley. And so now what you're seeing, and the wild part of it is, you've had injuries on the offensive line, and Dallas Goedert's missed a few games, and yet you have enough depth that you can have a guy like Calcaterra come in, and it's almost like you're not missing a beat. That's great. But that also speaks to the value of Barkley, and of course it also speaks to the value of your 2 guys on the outside, A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. And the nice thing, the encouraging thing, and I mentioned this a little bit ago, and I mentioned this on yesterday's show, but like seeing A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith have almost the same stat lines by the end of the game is an encouraging thing. Because one thing that detractors have kind of held against Jalen Hurts for years now is he gets locked on one guy, and that's the one guy that he'll feed. And in years past, it was Dallas Goedert. That was his number one option. It was his safety blanket, kind of like watching a young Tony Romo looking for Jason Witten. That was his go-to guy. And sometimes you'd be like, all right, well, there are other guys on this team that you're supposed to throw the ball to. Like, in theory, you would like to spread the love around. In this game against Cincinnati, 16 completions. I feel pretty good about it. Feel pretty good about the production of A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Calcaterra. And I feel good about what Barkley gave you out of the backfield. Now I'm going to go over to some of the comments here because Jamie brings up a good point. I don't know if anybody saw this. Dan Orlovsky was talking about the under center snaps and how it changed the offense. I know I made this comparison a bunch, and I know that it's like really, it's tricky and sometimes it triggers people because we have to go back to the DeMarco Murray days. But like, it makes such a difference when you set up a running back to be his most successful self. Okay, like it is legitimately stupid for a coaching staff to say, we're not going to go out of our way to try to do something to benefit the player. The player needs to fit the scheme. And that's what Chip Kelly did way back when with DeMarco Murray. We're not seeing that now. We're not seeing that at all. Now we're finally getting to see what it looks like to have a coaching staff that, for better or worse, it might have taken a little bit too long, but they did finally figure it out. They finally did kind of give him the opportunity to line up in the backfield and have some actual momentum going into that pile and looking for a hole. That, to me, is a really good sign. If you're looking for another positive to take away from it, it's I think the coach made adjustments. I think that an adjustment was made in the game planning going into the Bengals game. And that sets up potentially a lot of really big positives for you in what is going to be a really difficult stretch. You have the Jags are a particularly difficult game. You have the Commanders coming up. You have the Cowboys coming up. You have the Ravens coming up. A strong Steelers team still coming up. Like, it's not exactly an easy end of season. And we're already, oddly enough, it feels crazy, you're already 7 games into the season. You're 8 weeks into the NFL regular season. It doesn't feel like the midway point to me, but we're almost there. Like, we're practically there. And with that in mind, like, it's pretty important to, like, make sure that you're putting all of your skill players in their best position to win their individual matchups and to ultimately help you win the game. They've always been good at doing that with Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown because they effectively have 2 number 1 receivers on the outside. They have figured out a way to incorporate whichever tight end is in the lineup, which is great. And now it seems like they're figuring out the way to unlock an every down back. Kevin at iRock Philly over on YouTube says, I was expecting this Jags-Eagles game Sunday night, and they changed it to 4. I know many hate late games, but I hate the NFL jerking fans around. I agree with that, Kevin. I really do. And I totally get why the league does it. And there is a small part of me that does actually think that it's good that the league has the ability to flex these games and that it's not just like the last 2 or 3 years, the last 2 or 3 weeks of the season. But there is like the jerk around element to this, especially for like I think more of the out of town fans than the in town fans, right? Like if you were expecting to go see an Eagles game in Philly and you live anywhere remotely near Philly, all right, if you're planning on the night game, maybe it changes your daytime plans, but chances are you were going to go tailgate, right? So your Sunday's not totally blown up. If you have it moved from being a 1 o'clock game and flexed into a night game, that could be different. Like that actually could fundamentally change things. But the bigger deal is like for the out-of-town fans, because there are some people who book hotels, who book transportation, who are trying to figure out how they're going to get in and out of the city. And now all of a sudden you've blown it up on them. And it was like, a week's notice, I think, right? It was last week that they made the announcement about the Eagles-Jags game. So they don't give you a lot of time. To me, like, that's not showing that you really care about your fan base as the NFL. Like, it shows me you don't actually care all that much about your fans, and you don't care about their ability to get to these games, because I guess the NFL looks at it as, you've already bought the ticket. Ticket is already purchased. Whether or not you resell it is not their problem. But I kind of agree. I like the Sunday night games too. I don't like staying up that late for games, but man, like sometimes it's just nice. And like this felt like it had a pretty good storyline, right? Super Bowl winning coach, the first head coach in the history of the Philadelphia Eagles to win a Super Bowl, comes back to town against a guy who up until recently was very much viewed as being on the hot seat, and he still might be on a warm seat, but 2 pretty decisive wins in a row takes a lot of heat off. Like, that's still a good story. And it's still 2 young quarterbacks and and Jalen Hurts and Trevor Lawrence. Like, it's still a good matchup. Like, it's still an interesting matchup. I don't like when they flex out of prime time. I think if the Eagles had continued to struggle, if the Eagles were going into this game as a 500 or a below 500 team against a pretty putrid Jags team, then I'd say, all right, I guess it makes sense. But I'm not in love with the idea here. I'm not in love with the decision here. Now, I want to go back to Saquon here for a second, because Saquon is a guy that we have kind of touted on this show as being a pro's pro. We talked about this last week, the clip that was going around of Nick Sirianni sitting on the bench next to Saquon Barkley and saying, hey, like, you're close to getting your career high. I want you to go after it if you want to. And then Barkley essentially saying, like, no, I'm good. I want the young guys to eat. Ryan Clark had Saquon Barkley on his show over the weekend. And I just wanted to throw this to those of you who might have missed it. There's a pretty cool moment as they're kind of recapping what happened. And you get to hear a little bit more just from Saquon Barkley himself about how much that matchup really did mean to him. And you remember, going into that game, he said that he wasn't looking at it as a game of vengeance. He wasn't looking at it as a revenge game. It was just another game on the schedule. But I want to go to this clip, and I want to break this down a little bit. What Saquon Barkley had to say about last week against the Giants.
You're playing against the team that drafted you. You have an opportunity to break your career high in rushing yards, but you said you wanted to let the young guys eat. What was it in that moment that you were thinking that said, it'll be better for me to allow my teammates to get shine than have some sort of act of vengeance on my old team by breaking my career rushing record?
I mean, it was never about vengeance for me going into that game, to be honest. I struggled with that a little bit, but unbelievable supporting cast, whether it's my family, friends, coaches, teammates. But in that moment, which I kind of wish never went viral or kind of made it out there, obviously, shout out to the Eagles PR team. I know I was mic'd up, but I feel like it takes away from being authentic. But for me, it's like I see how hard, Kenny and Will Shipley worked. And I think Kenny's a really, really good running back. I tell him all the time, I got the scoop on him. Everyone sees him as a smaller back. They don't know how strong he is. And I get to compete with him in the weight room every single day.
I want to pause there for a second because there's something that I disagree with. And it's not about Gainwell. I like Gainwell a lot. He said he wishes that clip hadn't got out there because he thought that it kind of takes away from being authentic. I think it's the total opposite. Like, truly, I do. Because that wasn't a moment that he had in front of the cameras. Like, Saquon Barkley didn't go out after the Giants game and go out to a press conference and then get asked about it and say, yeah, you know what, I chose that I wanted the young guys to eat. Like, no, that was a true organic moment. I actually think that makes him a more authentic guy. I mean, like, sure, he knew he was mic'd up, but Barkley doesn't strike me as like a disingenuous dude. So like that actually felt like a real moment. And actually getting to kind of peel back the curtain a little bit and see that as it's playing out in the competitive atmosphere of a division rivalry game, albeit one that the Eagles were like very firmly in control of. I thought that actually speaks to a guy's authenticity. By all means, let me know in the comments if you agree, but we'll go back to this.
And then the Will Shipley kid, he's special. I think he's gonna be a really good player in the future. And he loves ball, he loves the game. So, sometimes my motivation is to go out there and get the job done. So I could see my guys shine, and the opportunity came where, Coach came up to me, and I appreciate Coach. A lot of coaches don't do that, but being so, locked in and to the game and understanding his players, like to some people, like they want that moment. They want that moment, rightfully so. But for me, it was all about like, hey, like we work just as hard together. The reason why I'm able to get this amount of yards is to be able to feel fresh because Kenny was out there balling with me. Will come in practice, takes reps from me. So I just want those guys to go out there and get their burn.
Hold up.
I would love to know from all of you out there on YouTube, Facebook, and X. How do you feel about Saquon Barkley? 7 games into the season. Has he lived up to what you thought he was going to be? Has he exceeded expectations? I think expectations were already high for the guy. I do think that there was probably a small part of the fan base that was really trying to maybe temper expectations a little bit because we all kind of know what it feels like to set the expectations too high for a free agent. And you do have to kind of accept the fact that, like, he's 27, had a lot of miles. You didn't want to imagine that he was going to be a generational-esque back here. But, like, I feel like he's exceeded my expectations. I'm going to go out to Ford here, who says, I feel Barkley has exceeded my expectations. He's played very well and seems like a good human being. Man, I'll tell you what, like, I think that part of it, too, the being a good human being, I know that we, like, kind of undervalue certain things. I'm not going to throw the in society. I hate that. I might talk about the election here a little bit at the end of the show. You can avoid that part if you want. But, like, I think that we fundamentally have lost very simple core tenets of what it is to be somebody who, like, is of value to their neighbors and to their friends and to their family. Like, I think that we've just kind of lost some kind of understanding of what it is to just be a good person, right? Like your values can be different. You can disagree about things. We're definitely going to talk about the election in a week, like later. But like, just because you don't agree with somebody, or just because you're not going to vote for the same person, like you could still be a good human being. You can have two people who are morally and almost maybe overly emotionally juxtaposed from one another, line up from each other, right? But like you could still both be good human beings. You just disagree about certain issues. But sometimes I feel like we've actually lost sight of what it is to even be a good human being and to be somebody who is of value to their community. Barkley seems like a really good guy. And it's two teams now that have gone out of their way between the Giants, during and after his tenure there, and the Eagles here who have been like, this guy's a good dude. And so like I look at it and I feel very positive about his addition to that locker room. I think he's been everything and more than advertised on the field. Jamie says, it's really nice to see Saquon's capabilities behind an O-line that does their job. Imagine how he feels, right? It's a really good point, too. The Giants have had bad offensive lines, and he was able to somehow still make the best out of a horrific situation behind some really bad lines. And also, by the way, at least in the Daniel Jones tenure, not playing with a particularly good quarterback. I know that it's kind of like hard, and maybe it seems a little bit hypocritical to try to really evaluate what exactly Daniel Jones is because he's played behind such a bad line. And like maybe we won't know. Like maybe eventually he'll be like a change of scenery guy. He'll go somewhere else. He'll have a better line in front of him. And all of a sudden, Daniel Jones ends up looking like the guy that the Giants decided to give $40+ million a year to. Like maybe that will happen someday, but I don't see it happening in New York. But again, like it kind of speaks to Barkley's dominance. It speaks to how good he was early in his career that he was able to overcome that. And now you do look at him behind a good offensive line, but I will also point out, not the healthiest offensive line this year. It's not like it wasn't like last year where it felt like you were getting all of the good luck. You were getting all of the best health luck in the world. He's playing behind a somewhat patchwork offensive line. And I know that we all feel pretty good about Cam Jurgens, and I do, but like that is a huge difference between a future first ballot Hall of Famer and a guy who's in his first season full-time playing center at the NFL level. And like he's done an admirable job, but like again, that's a critical position on that offense. That's the guy who's checking out for blitzes. That's a guy who's calling things at the line before snapping the ball. Like he plays a critical role. Oh, and by the way, he's kind of like that fulcrum point on the tush push. So he's the guy that's got to get low the fastest, the earliest, and like a lot falls on him. I don't know. Barkley has been able to just, again, to me, he's exceeded expectations. Nico says he's playing well, and I love everything he's doing off field. Beautiful. I'll go to Ford here too. He says, honestly, the NFC is wide open. Lions seem like the best, but they're beatable. And I don't disagree with that. It's a weird thing that we keep seeing, and I don't know how much you guys watch of the other games and of the other teams, but I have, last year, it was FanDuel, right? Yeah, it was FanDuel. Last year, FanDuel ran the promo where you got a few weeks, I think it was 3 weeks of NFL Sunday Ticket. And I was like, okay, I'm in. Like, it was 3 free weeks, and then it was like a discounted rate from that point on. So I was like, okay. So I packaged it with YouTube TV, and I love Red Zone. Red Zone's like my favorite channel. I love those whip around channels. I wish that the NBA had an all the time whip around channel. I wish the NHL had a dedicated whip around channel. I honestly wish that baseball, Major League Baseball, had on even the MLB Network had a whip around show. I love those shows. I think they're fantastic. I would absolutely love to see that happen in the other leagues. But all right, I have the benefit of I have Red Zone in one corner, and then I have 3 other games on. And I've tried to watch as much of the other NFC contenders as possible. Admittedly, not the easiest with all these kids running around this house. But like there aren't that many teams right now in the NFC that give me significant pause. There aren't that many teams right now that I sit down and I say like, all right, if the Eagles are who they've looked like they are the last 2 weeks, am I really afraid of the NFC South? Not really. I think the Bucs game maybe puts a little bit of a pause in the back of your mind. And I would just as easily say that it had a lot to potentially do with just the unbelievable heat on the field and the fact that the Eagles players just weren't ready for that. There were a few injuries. There were guys that just didn't look like themselves. And the Eagles, if you go back to that game, the Eagles offense couldn't get anything going early. The Bucs were just on the field, grinding down the Eagles defense. And eventually the defense kind of did settle in because the offense had longer sustained drives in the second half. But the Bucs don't really scare me. The Falcons are a good team. They are. And I think when you look back on it, that loss at home was a 1-point loss. Is that 22-21, I think? That was the game where you're like, Jesus, you only gave up 22 points. You should be able to win that game, given the offensive firepower on this team. That, to me, doesn't look like that bad of a loss now, just because of how Atlanta has played overall. But do I genuinely fear having to play the Falcons, whether that's in Philly or in Atlanta? No, not at all. The NFC West is an absolute dumpster fire right now. I mean, the Rams, if you look at it from top to bottom, the Cards, the Niners, and the Seahawks are all 4-4. And then you have the Rams at 3-4. So they're all really tightly bunched. And the Niners have had a lot of real injury concerns. It feels like each and every week there's a new injury to Deebo Samuel, no Christian McCaffrey. You start to kind of wonder about is this it for them? Is this just the typical, you lose a Super Bowl, you fall off? Is that what this season is going to be for them? Now, if they get healthy, do I think that the 49ers are a team that could give you a legitimate run for your money? Yes. Do I believe in Kyler Murray and the Arizona Cardinals? No. I simply don't believe in them because of the curse of the Pottsville Maroons, which we may have talked about on this show. The Cardinals can't win a Super Bowl until the NFL gives the Pottsville Maroons back the 1925 NFL championship. Maybe someday we'll do a thing on that, but the Cardinals don't scare me because the Cardinals can't win the Super Bowl. It's actually verboten. The football gods won't allow it. And then you look at the NFC North, and it's all right, the Packers look really strong. And they were able to kind of stem the tide of missing Jordan Love, who got hurt in the first game of the season, very late in the fourth quarter, on a play that Packers fans said was dirty by the Eagles, which it wasn't, but fine. They look strong. They look fine. The Vikings have looked strong. Interestingly enough, the Vikings and the Rams played each other. The Vikings were said to potentially be in conversations. There were rumors going around that maybe the Vikings would try to price Matt Stafford from the Rams, which would certainly make things interesting. That would certainly maybe change the NFC North race. I don't know how much it really changes the NFC race overall. But if I were Minnesota, would I rather have Matthew Stafford at this point than Sam Darnold? Yeah, I probably would. And I think that it would actually get them into a position where they could win that division. But Detroit is, for my money right now, the best team in the NFC North. Detroit looks like the most complete team, and they look like they came back this season with an absolute vengeance. They look like a team that has something to prove. And that kind of team is really dangerous because when it's not just the talent, but it's also the talent busting their ass to live up to or maybe even exceed their talent level, those are the teams you have to fear. So right now, I'd say somewhere in this NFC, I would say that the Lions might be the best team in the NFC, but man, I really don't like riding the wave, right? I don't like, it's not a flip-flop. I don't like that, 3 weeks ago, I'm standing here talking about how I think Nick Sirianni is a total dolt and a buffoon and not a head coach, because I still believe all that. But the defense especially has played really well this season. If you throw away week 1 and you throw away Tampa because the offense legitimately put the defense in a horrific position, this Eagles defense has been holding teams to 20 points or less, or 22 or less. And when you have the kind of offensive firepower that the Eagles do, you should be able to win virtually any of those other games. You should be able to beat just about any other team that's on your schedule. So, all right, maybe I think if you're the Eagles, you obviously want to get home field advantage. You say the Lions, a healthy Niners team, and you might even have to include Washington. You might. Now, I can't go out of my way here to act in like a total psycho and say that like, oh yeah, Jaden Daniels, totally for real. Should probably be top 5 MVP voting. We're not going there. But like Washington does look like a threat. Now, Washington did have to have a Hail Mary at the end of a game against a Chicago Bears team that is severely lacking in talent. They're over 500 and like they're okay. But I wouldn't say that the Bears are like some incredible squad right now. But like Washington looks like a team that believes in itself. They, I think, are starting to consider themselves like a team of destiny. And if you missed it, which at this point there's practically no chance that you did, the Hail Mary that got thrown in that game, where number 29's in the bottom of the corner. I broke this down on Monday's Crossing broadcast. He's out taunting the fans before the snap, after the snap, and like 3 seconds or so after the ball snapped, it's like somebody yells to him, or maybe the fans are like, hey, dumbass, like the play's going on. He runs across the field. He's the one who touches the ball, who tips it into the hands of the Commanders receiver, which ends up being the winning touchdown in that game. Sure, it might be a miracle play, but like the Commanders are still legitimately in the race in the NFC East. They lead the division at 6-2. Like they are a team that you can't really look past. So, in essence here, in summation, Ford is right. The NFC is wide open. It could go a whole bunch of different ways. I don't know how you guys feel. I like when a team is dominant. I liked when the Eagles were pretty damn dominant on their way to a Super Bowl run. I liked, of course, the first half of last year where the Eagles were dominant. But there is something to be said for facing some early adversity. I will never, ever, 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 ever be, and you can go back to every show that I've ever done since starting to talk into a microphone like 7 years ago. I do not subscribe to the notion that when you're playing good football at the end of a season and you lose in that last week or you lose one of the last 2 games and fans start to go, oh, well, you know what? It's okay, because you'd rather lose at the end of the regular season than in the playoffs. Like sometimes it's good to have a late loss so you know how to adjust. I don't agree with that at all. I don't like that mentality. I think that often ends up being the thing that kind of breaks a team's back. So I'm fine with early season adversity, and this team had a lot of it. And especially this head coach had a lot of it. And I would like to believe that just based on some of the adjustments that we saw, a little bit against the Giants, but certainly against the Bengals, I would really like to believe that we are now in a position where we're seeing a Nick Sirianni, Kellen Moore relationship that has begun to blossom, and that we might start to see more of what we expected and more consistency, and a Jalen Hurts who maybe isn't going to be an MVP runner-up again, but is certainly a Jalen Hurts who's a top 5, top 7 NFL quarterback. And if that's the kind of play you're going to get for the rest of the season, this team's going to win a lot of games. This team could very well win the division. This team could very well win the NFC. This team could very well get to a Super Bowl. I'm not ready to pencil them in there yet, but I am ready to start to say, like, yeah, I think that the talent is starting to show up again. And I think they're starting to execute at a high enough level. I'm going to go back out to the comments here. Kevin IRock Philly says, NFC power rankings, in my opinion, number 1, Detroit, number 2, Washington, number 3, Eagles, number 4, Green Bay, number 5. Oh, no, he has Minnesota and Green Bay tied there at number 4. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. Huh. Ford says that the Bucs game was annoying, but injuries, I guess. Kevin says Falcons' loss was a fluke. I don't know if it was a fluke. I think that what we've seen is that like the Falcons are a better team at this point in the season than we gave them credit for when they played in week 2. I missed this. Jamie brings up MLB has big inning on their streaming service. I did not know that. So if that's the whip around, is that every day? I'd love to know. I actually might be able to like enjoy more baseball if I knew that was the thing. And I did not know that thing, so I don't know. Does that fall on me? Does that fall on Major League Baseball for not marketing it to me? There are a lot of targeted ads these days. How have I not gotten served that yet? Ford says that so many talking heads predicted the Rams to be in the Super Bowl. Whoops. They're not out of it yet. Like I said, they're a half game behind. Like the Rams have pretty much just as good of a chance of making it to the Super Bowl, of winning the NFC West as any other team in that division. I still think that there are a lot of flukes out there. Joe Papel says Super Bowl teams are going to have to go through Detroit and Kansas City. Kansas City. I'm so sick of the Chiefs. And then it was DeAndre Hopkins got traded there. I'm like, what are we doing? They made a move yesterday. I forget the name of the player. It was like last night. Defensive player. I think a linebacker that the Eagles were apparently interested in as well. And it's like, why are teams trading with the Chiefs? Like, why? Can somebody explain to me what's the competitive advantage of making a trade with the Kansas City Chiefs? Like, we know that they're the odds-on favorite to win the Super Bowl again, right? Like, we know that they're in the midst of like another dynasty, right? Like, we all understand. Why are we making trades with Kansas City? Like, fine. If you want to part with a maybe starting linebacker and they're going to give you a first-round pick, even though it's going to be late, like, sure, okay, you're an idiot not to make that move. But like, why are we trading with Kansas City? Why is anybody trading with Kansas City? We need a boycott. We need a ban. Maybe a tariff. No, I'm just kidding. Andrew Fawcett says, morning all. Sorry I'm late. I actually have to work this morning. Oh my gosh, Andrew, I need to get in touch with you because I had a buddy send me something that blew my mind. I think it was over on TikTok. I should see if I can find it on Twitter because that's just that's easier for me to access and pull up on the screen. But there's something going on that I can't access because I don't live in Texas or I don't live in any of the places that have these things. But Buc-ee's apparently just rolled out all of their Christmas stuff, and there's a Buc-ee's Nutcracker. And so I, like a psychopath, was like, oh, you know what? I'm gonna go and look and see if Buc-ee's has a merch store online, so I could just buy the Buc-ee's Nutcracker. I think they call it the Buck Cracker, and I was really excited. And guess what? Can't buy it online. Can't buy any of the Buc-ee's stuff online. You have to get it like through eBay or through secondary stuff. I can't have that. Can't have it. Not good. Let's see. Joe Papel was asking for, but we'll throw it out here too. Barring injury, who's the team or who's beating them in Kansas City in January? Let's take a look at the AFC really quick. Who in the AFC could give Kansas City a legitimate run? I don't think the Bills can. I don't buy into Josh Allen's ability to perform in the postseason. So no. The rest of the AFC East, by the way, is an absolute dog shit. Like absolute horrific race right now. Dolphins are 2-5. Tua came back. They lost in heartbreaking fashion. Patriots are 2-6. The Jets are 2-6. Aaron Rodgers looks like he'd rather be any place other than playing in the NFL right now. The Broncos aren't going to give them a run. The Chargers aren't going to. The Raiders aren't going to. Steelers are an interesting team. I don't think the Steelers can beat Kansas City, but the Steelers are in a really weird position. If you haven't followed that, like, there they are in the offseason. They go out and they get Justin Fields and they get Russell Wilson. Justin Fields gets the Steelers off to a really, really strong start. I think they got out to a 4-2 start. Then Russell Wilson comes back healthy, and they hand the reins over to Russell Wilson. All the Steelers fans start freaking out. Like, no. Everybody saw what Russell Wilson was with the Broncos, which was not the Russell Wilson that made it to Super Bowls in Seattle. So people started freaking out. Well, Russell Wilson's gotten them back-to-back wins. So all of a sudden, the Steelers kind of look like they might be back. They have a veteran head coach in Mike Tomlin. Like, I don't hate their chances of making a deep playoff run. And also in that division's Baltimore. And you can't rule out Lamar Jackson. And more importantly, you can't rule out a team that has an absolute stud of his own in Derrick Henry in the backfield, which is almost, in a way, reset what the expectations are for running backs in this league and probably resets the free agent market going forward. Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry only cost teams money, not picks, and they were both relatively affordable when you compare them to some other guys in this league. They're both steals. And Derrick Henry's been an absolute monster for Baltimore so far this season. AFC South, nobody really scares me. CJ Stroud, I'm a big CJ Stroud guy. I like the Texans. I have no problem with the Texans. I'm drinking out of my Houston mug from when my wife and I went there for our anniversary. I will actively root for the Texans to do well, and I like CJ Stroud, but they're not going to beat the Chiefs either. So I'd say, like, maybe, I think Baltimore probably is the most realistic team. That maybe is the only team that I would give a legitimate chance right now in the AFC. And I think that's it. Let's see. Kevin at iRock Philly says Detroit and Washington will be the Eagles' biggest challenges in the NFC. I think that's probably pretty safe to say. Ford does point out correctly. Nick Wright predicted that Washington would win the NFC East. I do remember on this show doing the breakdown of the clip where he put the Eagles at 3rd, and I think he had the Commanders at. I thought he had the Commanders at 2nd. I thought he had the Cowboys to win. Maybe I don't remember. Ford, we'll have to go back and watch that. We'll have to go back and check that out. I'm not totally positive. I thought he had the Commanders at number 2. Kevin and I Rock Philly says Eagles' toughest games at Washington, at Ravens, and then Steelers. I think those are probably the ones that you look at. I know that there was the conversation about like the Eagles having an easier schedule second half of the season. I don't see that. I think it's because people thought that the Steelers were going to fall off and not be a particularly good team. There are practically no gimmies on the schedule. I think Jacksonville is probably about like your last real gimme on the schedule. And then other than that, like you take a quick gander at it. You're at Dallas. That's not a gimme. Home against Washington, certainly not. At the Rams, that could end up still being a tough game. At Baltimore, tough game. Home against the Panthers. All right, that's a gimme. Home against the Steelers, no longer a gimme. At Washington, no. Home against the Cowboys, no. Home against the Giants should be a gimme, although that could also be a revenge game, and you have no idea what things are going to look like at the end of the season with the standings, so that could go a whole bunch of different ways. Let's see. Andrew Fawcett, are you going to hook me up? He says, I'll send you a message on Instagram. Andrew Fawcett, you are my favorite person. You're my favorite Texan. My favorite. Of all the people in Texas, and there are many people in Texas, you may be my favorite if you can hook me up with with the buck cracker. Anyway, let's see if there's anything else that we want to get to, because I would like to get off of the football now, because this has been a long football segment. I did not expect to go this long in football, but that's okay. Ford says he doesn't trust Lamar, doesn't trust him in the playoffs, couldn't do it at home last season, had home field advantage. I'm not so sure. I still believe in Lamar Jackson, but I understand the hesitance. I think that having a legitimate stud in the backfield probably helps him. He didn't have a guy like Derrick Henry last year. JH says the Eagles are going to beat the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. Book it. # never a doubt. JH, I would love that. We'd feel fantastic about that. Nothing like exacting a little bit of revenge. The best part would be if this Eagles team had gone through the kind of adversity that it did early in the season, and they really do start to turn it on, and it's almost an inverse of last year where you go really hot and then it falls off. Like, imagine a scenario here where, like, the Eagles maybe, like, I said before, I don't like the idea of, like, you lose one of the last 2 games of the year and you say, well, better now than in the playoffs. I will say, if you play really strong competitive games against Dallas and Washington and the Steelers and the Ravens, and say, like, out of, like, 5 games, Dallas, Washington, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, and, like, let's say the Rams. We'll call the Rams a competitive game. If you end up 3-2 out of those games, right, I still probably feel good about that as long as you played hard and it's a close game in each of those. You're just like, wow, this is 2 legitimate playoff contenders going head to head. I can buy into that. Somebody clip this for later, but like if you end up 3-2 in a stretch like that, I think that's actually okay. Truly, I think that it is good to kind of have playoff tested games. To some extent, you could make the argument that maybe the Eagles looked at this Bengals game as sort of being a playoff game, right? You're going on the road against a team that was 1 win away from getting back to 500, kind of following a script that they followed for a few years now, where the Bengals get off to a rough start and then they turn it on. The Eagles didn't take the Bengals lightly, and they played a very strong game. See, we've come back around to the Eagles again. JH also says that there are some doubts about the Eagles. So I said, book it, but then said, there are some doubts. Okay, now I would like to talk about somebody who I don't have doubts about. Is that okay? Can we move off the Eagles? We're going to move off the Eagles, but I do want to remind people that as you're watching the show on YouTube, X, and Facebook, you might actually be one of the people who instead listens in the podcast feed. And yes, there is a podcast feed. If you don't like having your phone on the dashboard of your car or on the vent or wherever you put your phone, as you have Waze or Google Maps or Apple Maps pulled up on your phone as you're maybe going down to Wells Fargo Center for a game, maybe going to work, going to school, doing whatever it is that you do. If you're like, I don't want to be the person who's walking around the grocery store with YouTube pulled up on my phone, there is a podcast feed. There is an app for that. You can find the Russ Joy Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, Pandora, wherever you get your podcasts. Now, Google Podcasts is kind of dead, so it's like YouTube Music now. But, like, you get the point. So it's everywhere that you could get your podcast. If you like the third-party apps, if you like what was the one I used to use? It was like Playcast or something, and then there's there's Overcast, and there's like Player FM or whatever. You find it there as well. So the show is everywhere. Find it in the podcast feed, subscribe. And I have good news for all of you, and that, of course, is that the drive to 500 subscribers, we are getting closer, my friends. I know that it seemed kind of funny to do when there was like 300 subscribers. We've now comfortably crossed over the 400 subscriber mark. Once we get to 500, within 7 days, I will pull the name. I will pull the name of a random subscriber. That person will win the jersey of their choice, worth up to $175. It could be an Eagles jersey, it could be a Sixers jersey, it could be a Flyers jersey, it could be a Phillies jersey, a Union jersey, a non-Philly sports team jersey, up to $175. So if you haven't done so already, go over to YouTube. It's very simple. You go over to YouTube, you subscribe to the channel. Now, I would encourage you, obviously, to ring the little bell to get notified whenever the show goes live. As we know, sometimes it goes live at 8:30, sometimes it doesn't. So when you ring the bell, you get the little notification. Sometimes it sends you an email. Maybe it sends you a push notification on your device to say, hey, Russ started the show at 8:45 instead of 8:30, and you're like, oh, okay, well, that's good to know. Or like you go on at 8:30 and you see there's no stream setup sitting on the channel, and you're like, oh, maybe he forgot, maybe he's asleep. That's not true. Maybe his kids missed the bus. That's possible. You get the notification when the show goes live, so just go do that. But like the video, that's big. I've noticed some of the episodes, lots of likes, some not as many likes, and then I feel personally wounded. Then I'm like, did these people, they watched it and they didn't like it? Do they not like the show anymore? So anyway, like the video. It actually does help. It helps people, other Philly sports fans, find the show. So if you haven't done so already, hit the like button. And I always ask this, but especially for the people in the live stream, I love and appreciate all of you. But if you can go into the regular comments section after the episode's over, you can leave your thoughts about something you agree with, disagree with, a prediction, whatever you want it to be. You leave that in the comments. That also helps. YouTube smiles at that kind of stuff. I don't know why, but they do. So we just, we try to make them happy, I guess. Now, I will tell you, if you've been over on X this whole time and you've been tweeting, because I see that there are tweets, there are notifications that are coming through, and I don't know if they're about the show or if they're about a tweet that I put out about Zavragan last night. But I think that one or two people have been watching the show and they've been replying to the video and they haven't been clicking on the video and then sending a tweet there. If you do it that way, you're just sending a reply. If you click the video first and then you type your comment, I can pull it up on the screen. Okay, I'm done with all that. That was just a lot. I think I mentioned Kolosov at some point, and now we have JH calling him Sexy Alexei. I am not selling that shirt. That is not a shirt I will be selling. Absolutely not. Ford also wants the Brandon Graham, Kelly Green, John. So that's where we're at. Okay. Joe Papel says positive waves Moriarty. Chris Freed says, are we fast approaching the point where we can say nothing good came out of the Cutter Gauthier trade? Oh boy, do we have to go to the Flyers? There are Flyers questions coming in. Maybe we do. Oh boy. Dave Quinn says, I did it. I hit the like button. Now talk about Kolosov, or did I miss that already? No, you did not miss. All right, fine. I guess we'll go Flyers. I was going to go Sixers, but I guess we'll go Flyers. Do we go Flyers first? We go Sixers first. I should open up to a poll. I should actually put it on the YouTube channel and let democracy prevail. We are 1 week. We are 1 week away from an election. Perhaps I should let this to democracy. In fact, for the first time maybe in the history of this show, I am going to throw up a poll because I want people to have some kind of say in this wonderful show that all of you people, for whatever reason, decide to check out. So allow me. I'm going to create a poll. You guys are going to get to choose. Do we go Sixers next or do we go Flyers next? And remember, this will come down to whoever wins, okay? Whoever gets the most votes, and it's going to have to be quick because I feel bad for all the people who are in the podcast feed listening to the show after the fact. They're like, we don't get to vote. This doesn't seem very fair to us. You know what those people get the benefit of? They get the nice little timestamps. Or the people who watch after the fact that aren't watching it live. Those people, they have the timestamps. So put that in the segments, and then you can see it on the stream. So if you don't like the Flyers, you just skip the Flyers, probably go to the Sixers, or vice versa. Or maybe you listen to one and then you come back, or whatever. As of right now, we're at 71%. 7 votes in. 71% says Flyers. I feel like we might have to talk Flyers. Sixers are picking up some steam. Now it went the other way. We're at 70-30 right now, 10 votes. I don't know how long I'm going to leave these votes up for. I think that that's probably an okay stop or an okay place to. We're up to 13 votes. 69% say Flyers. I think just based on some math, just based on the numbers I can see across the stream, I'm thinking we probably should go Flyers. All right, we'll go Flyers. And then we'll come back to Sixers. All right. Maybe I'll send a smoke signal. I see that Ford is not looking forward to the Flyers talk, but that's okay, Ford. I'll send you a little smoke signal. I'll make a fire in the office here and let you know when it's done. Because I am seeing a lot of comments here about the Flyers, so fine. We'll go to the Flyers. The Flyers are in a very weird position right now because if you paid attention to the team over the weekend, maybe you did, maybe you didn't. We were down there doing Press Row Show on Saturday and Sunday, which made it not feel like a weekend at all. Saturday, the Flyers were in this weird game against the Wild. They go up 2-0. They blow the lead. It kind of goes back and forth a bunch. And then in the third period, they actually sort of woke up and they walk away with a 7-5 win. And you go, all right, not the best performance by a team, but it did kind of feel like last year, at least a little bit. And you're like, maybe this is the momentum the team needed. Sean Couturier gets a hat trick. You're like, all right, maybe we feel good about it. Maybe if you're a Flyers fan, you feel happy about how Saturday played out, and you think that's going to lead to good momentum going into Sunday's game on Sunday night against the Montreal Canadiens. But prior to the game on Saturday against the Wild, the Flyers took Jetlachenko, their number one pick from this past draft, and they sent him back to Guelph. They sent him back to juniors. So his first season with the Flyers is officially over. He didn't get the full 9 games. He didn't get to play in 9 games. He played in a few. He looked okay. He had a really impressive enough camp for the coaching staff to want him to be here and to get to experience some of the travel and to get to experience what preparation is like in the NHL. And it's all good. I don't feel any of it as a negative. He's 18, all right? Like, he's an 18-year-old kid. You can't expect a lot. He also wasn't being viewed as a generational talent. He wasn't a young Sidney Crosby. He wasn't like a young Connor McDavid. It wasn't even like a young Connor Bedard. He was just being viewed as like, oh, might have even been a stretch where they drafted him. And yet, there he was on opening night. So Jetlachenko gets sent down. We also find out that Cam York is going to be out for at least 2 weeks, which in Flyers speak means like probably 4 months. We don't know. No one actually knows. If there's one thing in this life that you can pretty much guarantee, it's when the Sixers or the Flyers give you a timeline on how long a player is going to be out, double, triple, or quadruple it. It almost never comes up sooner, and it almost never is exactly on time. So Cam York's going to be out. Cam York has been one of their best defensemen, which means Eric Johnson gets back in the lineup. It means that they bring up Emil Andre, who maybe will get to play some games. But more importantly, what it meant was Alexei Kolosov was getting called up, which is very interesting. Muy interesante. So the Flyers, as of right now, have 3 goalies on the roster. They've got Sam Ersson, who's their clear number 1, who had to step up after Carter Hart, whoop, whoop, that's the sound of the police, at the end of last year, or halfway through last year. So Carter Hart's gone. Sam Ersson had to be the number 1. That was, mixed results. But he got to go into the offseason knowing he's the number 1 goalie, prepare for being the number 1 goalie. Has looked pretty damn good this season so far. Then you have Ivan Fedotov, who they brought over late last year, got the visa. He had all new pads. He was trying to break it in. He never really looked comfortable, but like, what did you expect? Had the whole offseason. Didn't look particularly great in the preseason. Got a few starts under his belt in the NHL to start this season. Also didn't look particularly good. Alarm bells start to sound. Because despite the fact that they're a rebuilding team, the organization doesn't want to take 15 steps back. They probably should. Always good to get yourself in position for elite talent because they're in cap hell, due in part to Chuck Fletcher. A little bit of that is of their own doing, but okay, we'll steer away from that for right now. So they don't want to take 15 steps back, at least to start the season, because there was some enthusiasm around the Flyers based on the fact that they were sort of in a playoff race late into last season before the wheels really fell off. So there was like a lot of excitement around Matvei Mishkov. There was excitement about Jetlachenko. But things weren't going well, and they especially weren't going well with Fedotov. But instead of trying to put him on waivers and hope that he would get through, they probably would with a $3.25 million cap hit, the Flyers said, you know what? We have the ability with putting Cam York on IR. They're like, we're going to bring up Kolosov, and we're going to give him a start. So Sunday rolls around, and Alexei Kolosov gets to actually get his first NHL start. Now, I don't want to relitigate this whole thing, right? And those of you who have been following the Flyers, you know how this goes, and those of you who haven't, This is just the very brief synopsis. Last year, Alexei Kolosov had been playing in the KHL for Dynamo Minsk, hometown team. He gets his visa. He's going to come over, hopefully get a couple of games for their minor league team, the Phantoms, and not only get that, but then also potentially get maybe a few starts at the NHL level. While he's waiting for his visa, Ivan Fedotov just shows up in the U.S., visa in hand, gets to start. Kolosov goes down, plays 2 games for the Phantoms, doesn't get in the playoffs. There's a whole bunch of he said, they said through the offseason. Kolosov's not comfortable. He goes back to Belarus, doesn't report to training camp. Looks like, oh my God, like, how is this guy going to try to strong arm the team? There's a communication that's had. He changes agents again. And then you take a step back and you go, all right, what exactly is Alexei Kolosov going to do? What is this going to look like with the Flyers? He goes down. He's playing for the Phantoms. Does okay. Like, does just fine. Kolosov looks okay. Okay? But certainly not blowing anybody's doors off. The Flyers have this opportunity to bring him up to the NHL level and get a start and see what he looks like, okay? He looked okay on Sunday. He didn't look incredible. Like, he doesn't look like the second coming of pick your favorite goalie. But, like, he looked more comfortable. Where Fedotov is this, like, super massive human being who's, like, trying to look over traffic, Kolosov does get down and play a more athletic style of goalie. He does look like a guy who can actually compete in this league. He looks like a guy who can set himself up for success and maybe get this team a few wins. They gave up 4 goals, but they weren't all his fault. One of them really was only his fault. It kind of went under his arm that he needs to make that save. But the others, missed assignments by defensemen. One is this incredible redirect on a Gallagher. But Gallagher that, like, it hits the stick that's, like, almost shoulder high, hits the stick, and then, like, the speed, like, doubles coming off the stick. Like, it's an absolute laser. It's kind of a laser going in, but it's absolutely a laser after it hits the stick. So you walk away from it and you go, all right, what did the coach think of Kolosov? Well, the coach gave one answer. And he said right off the bat that the positive was the goalie played pretty well. But that's all we got about Kolosov because the media didn't ask again the entire post-game press conference about Alexei Kolosov. It's 11 minutes of a post-game presser, and no one asked another thing about Alexei Kolosov, not a single person. So that was bad. Okay, like that's just like that's not good work by the media who are down there. All right, because he's like one of the big stories in the offseason. It's kind of a big moment. There was some conjecture about whether or not he was the first Belarusian goalie to ever play in a game in the NHL. That was not true. That he was the first Belarusian goalie to start a game, also not true. We did a little bit of research at the desk. It was Danny Taylor, is a Canadian Belarusian goalie, but he was born in the UK. So technically, Kolosov was the first Belarusian-born goalie to play and start a game in the NHL. It doesn't matter. Kolosov looked good. But we didn't get to hear from Alexei Kolosov. And that is actually something that we have not gotten to talk about at all. And I'm sure that we'll talk about at some point on So the Goalie this week. But, like, the Flyers have apparently, after hearing from some media people, and I saw Kevin Kurz put it out from The Athletic, apparently, in the midst of a season where the most highly touted prospect is a 19-year-old Russian who is learning English, but a Russian who speaks Russian, and now despite the fact that their backup goalie, who has like somewhat passable English, also is a Russian speaker, and despite the fact that this third goalie now, Alexei Kolosov, is Belarusian who speaks Russian and does not speak English, the Flyers haven't employed a Russian translator. They apparently don't think that that's important, which is crazy, right? Because what exactly are you supposed to do? Igor Zamula speaks Russian. Fedotov speaks Russian. Zamula speaks Russian and English. Fedotov, Russian and some English. Mishkov, Russian and very little English. And then Kolosov apparently speaks no English at all. They don't think it's important to have a translator. Now, the way that it had been worded to me by some people was that, they don't think it's important for him to have a translator. And I said, no, that's not what that is. That's the Flyers controlling the narrative. That's legitimately a thing where the Flyers are actively trying to prevent the media from getting quotes from Matvei Mishkov or from requesting Matvei Mishkov every night. In the offseason, or maybe it was the preseason, Tortorella said that like he's going to control how much Mishkov talks to the media, and it's not going to be the Matvey Mishkov show. He's not the reason that they don't have a translator. I can't imagine. But I'm sorry. That is such a shitty thing to do if you're an organization, that this media can't actively ask questions of the most important player on the team, and that they can't get the backup goalie or even this potential third goalie who might end up staying with the team the rest of the season in Kolosov. They can't get these people to speak to the media because nobody speaks Russian. Now, I had long made the joke that I was going to learn Russian in time for Mishkov coming to the U.S. I did not expect him to be here in 2024. I thought it was going to be 2026. I can tell you that I've started to kind of go back to some of my old notes from a class that I audited. And if worse comes to worse, perhaps on the Press Row show, I will go down into the locker room and I will request Matvey Mishkov. And I will make sure that my Russian is good enough, at least hockey-based Russian is good enough, that I'll ask Matvey Mishkov some questions. Or I'll go down and ask Alexei Kolosov some questions. Am I that much of a dick? Yes, I am. Will I do it to prove a point? Yes, I will. Would I much rather the Flyers just hire a translator? Yes, I do. But Kolosov looked okay. I thought he was fine. And we go over here. Landros 2 says, Kolosov, 4 goals on 24 shots, and that's an improvement. That's the state of Flyers goalies. I don't think, in fairness, I don't think that, like I said, those 4 goals were all on Kolosov. I think one of them was. That's it. So I wouldn't really think that much about it. I wouldn't really worry that much about it. Let's see. JH says, Les habitants von Montréal. Andrew Fawcett says 6 points for Coots in 9 games. 5 of them came in the same game, but hey, it's a good point. Absolutely a good point. Couturier has kind of gone and rolled back the clock, and it's fantastic, and we all should feel good about it. If you're a Flyers fan, you should feel good about Couturier. Now, this is one of those things where somebody's going to say this was a great move by John Tortorella to piss him off and play him on the 4th line left wing in his 800th game, and it lit a fire under Sean Couturier. I don't think that's what this is. I think Couturier is just like kind of livid as is about how things went last year with the coach, and I don't think that like he needed another fire to be lit under him. I really don't think that's what it is. But if you want to tell yourself that, random person out there, you certainly can. Andrew Fawcett says, Ersson being a clear number 1 is a stretch. He's been okay, but he's still learning. He's a clear number 1 relative to the other 2 guys. Fedotov's not a number 1 guy. Kolosov, we haven't seen enough at the North American level, whether it was the 2 games last year, the start of the season at the Phantoms, or even this game, to say that he looks like a number 1. So we're not positive here, okay? Let's see what else. Dave Quinn says Ersson hasn't been that good this year. No goalie has yet. I think he's actually looked okay. I don't agree with that. I think the team in front of these guys hasn't played particularly well, and I think that's kind of like where they're at, okay? Let's see. Dersh says, I'm not a fan of Kolosov and his shenanigans, but any judgment in his first NHL game in a game 2 of a back-to-back with this team is insane. I agree with that. I think that's actually fair. I think it's totally fair. I think that like the one other thing that you look at if you're talking about the good potential goalie that you have here in Kolosov is that like if he stays up here, which Anthony seems to think, we talked about this on the Press Row show, Anthony seems to think that there's a very high likelihood that Kolosov stays here the entire season, that they're going to put Fedotov on waivers, he'll clear because of the cap hit, and that you'll get to give him routine starts. Like you'll be able to have Fedotov actually get every night starts at the AHL level, adjust. Maybe it makes him a possible trade candidate. Maybe it gets him where, like, if there's an injury to Ersson or to Kolosov, you bring him back up and he's ready to go. I'm not sure. JH has my 100% reasonably probable conspiracy theory is the only reason they gave the Iron Sieve, Fedotov, a bag was to bring Mishkov over early. You can have that. I believe that they have the same agent. I do think that the Fedotov extraction from Russia was probably a good thing and may have been part of how they were able to get Mishkov over here soon. Remember, NHL teams and KHL teams definitely can't negotiate together. It's against the rules and the agreements between the teams. They can't, but the agent can. The agent can kind of be an intermediary to kind of figure out how to get a guy out. Now, the really great thing is that you could feel even better about the fact that, like, Zavragan has played out of his mind. He was playing for Sochi, and then SKA brought him back over. He's 19. He's put up better numbers in the KHL this year at age 19 than Fedotov and Kolosov last season. He looks like a legit stud. Isn't it crazy that the Flyers went from, like, can't have a goalie, can't find a goalie, had Bobrovsky. Snyder wanted Brizgalov. Brizgalov wouldn't mentor Bobrovsky. You traded Bobrovsky. He's gone. Bobrovsky has certainly had plenty of success, won a Vezina, won a Stanley Cup. You had Carter Hart. Carter Hart looked really good. I still, if you go back and listen to any episodes of Snow the Goalie, I was never totally sold on him being a top 10, top 5 goalie, but he was a legitimate number 1 goalie. And then, whoop, that's the sound of the police. So he's gone. And now you're left with Ersson. You have this Fedotov guy who some people thought could push Hart for playing minutes a few years ago. You have this guy Kolosov who no one really knows what to expect. All of that. Like, you take all those things into account. And you go like, all right, there's maybe some positivity here. Like, Kolosov's also young. Ersson's not old. Fedotov will probably be best served as being trade bait. And then you go like, you have Bjarnason who's in the system. You have Zavragan who's in the system. All of a sudden, the Flyers aren't a goalie factory, but they have intriguing goalie prospects for the first time in probably a decade, maybe longer. Like, that's exciting stuff. Okay. I'm kind of done with that. Let's see what else. Andrew Fawcett says Kolosov understands it but doesn't speak it. Sort of like me with Spanish. Okay. Now, if Kolosov understands it, that's great, but the problem is trying to get the answer back out of him to the media, you know? So, I don't know. C-Max says, Russ, if you do this, I will fund this. I don't know what am I funding? Is it the buyout of Zavragan's contract to bring him over? Maybe that's it. Maybe that's it. Landro says, Ersson, the number 1, the tallest midget, tallest midget in the circus. I don't know. Maybe. Tyler DeMuro says, aren't the Flyers the only team with a sub 800 save percentage? I don't know. I could look. I don't know off the top of my head. Let's look. Team, NHL, leaders. Let's see. Where are the Flyers? The Philadelphia Flyers this year in save percentage. We have to invert it. Let's see. The Flyers have an 853 save percentage. Tyler, so you are fake news. You are fake news, Tyler. It's very sad. You hate to see it. 853. It is the worst in the league. 32nd in the league. Colorado has an 863 save percentage. Edmonton and Utah both have an 873. San Jose, 880. Ottawa, 882. I mean, there are a lot of how many teams do we have here? It's 14 teams have a sub 900 save percentage. So there you go. There we are. I think C-Mac here is talking about if I went down into the locker room to go ask the Russian players questions in Russians. Can you imagine Tort's face if he found Russ did this? Like, that would end Snow the goalie. Nah, it'd be totally fine. How could you hate reporter? How could you hate person who goes down and asks question of player in his native tongue? How do you do this? I do not know yet. All right. Last thing today. It's been a long show. Sixers. We have a little bit of positivity. We can ride just a tiny little bit of Sixers positivity going into Wednesday's game against the Pistons. They have the Pistons coming up. They have the Grizzlies coming up in the next 2 games. So positivity. I am positive that the Sixers are going to look like absolute geniuses no matter what happens on Wednesday when we watch Tobias Harris vomit all over himself. Tobias Harris has been, to put it very nicely, dog shit this season for the Pistons. Like, legitimately awful in his return to Detroit. Remember, he played in Detroit prior to being here. He also played for what? It was Orlando, right? It was Orlando, then Detroit, played for the Clippers, then played for the Sixers. And now he's back with the Pistons. Kind of a mess. But Tobias Harris this season, very bad. Very, very bad. Averaging 10 points, 7 rebounds, 2.3 assists, shooting a scorching 34% from the field, 17.6% from beyond the arc. That's an effective field goal percentage of 37.5%. That's what Tobias Harris is doing right now. So while Tyler DeMuro is absolutely trying to troll here with a little bit of sarcasm, the Tobias Harris revenge game. I don't know what a revenge game looks like for Tobias Harris, but what I can tell you is that I certainly wouldn't be afraid of it if I were the Sixers. 17.6% from beyond the arc. 17.6. That is unfathomable. 34.1% from the field in general is unfathomable. Horrific numbers. So do I feel pretty good about the Sixers' chances against the Pistons? I do. And I feel good about it for two reasons. And maybe we'll dive more into this. Jamie's great. Revenge game would be him taking a charge. That was good. We'll probably get into it more on Friday. I think this maybe will be a little bit more of a Sixers heavy show on Friday, and obviously like previewing the Eagles game against the Jags and anything else happens with the Flyers. But Tyrese Maxey played basketball for the first two games of the season, played an first half against Indiana, and then he turned things back up. And then he became the Tyrese Maxey that looked like a number one option on a team that doesn't have Joel Embiid. He looked like a guy who could be a number two option, even on a team that has both Joel Embiid and Paul George. Looked incredible. Put up 45 points. That to me was like, that's the thing that you needed to see if you were the Sixers. You needed to see that Tyrese Maxey was going to be able to get you at least one win in those first three. And you had to see that, like, despite the fact that, like, teams are going to actively try to shut him down, that he was going to be able to overcome it and figure it out. Now, we don't know exactly when we're going to get back Paul George. We don't know when he's going to crack the lineup. He is practicing. He's at least doing some shoot around. I don't know if he's a full participant right now in every practice, but like it seems like he's kind of gearing back up from that hyperextended knee. Joel Embiid, nobody knows. Nobody knows what the plan is. Nobody has any idea. If Joel Embiid doesn't play for 2 months or 3 months, nothing will surprise us. If he plays tomorrow, we would be surprised, but we'd say, all right, cool. The Sixers don't actually have a plan that they can clearly articulate. So that's its own problem. Okay. Tyrese Maxey looked really good in the second half of the Pacers game. They win that one on the road. Pacers team that many believe is going to be a playoff team. We can feel good about that. I actually feel very good about the fact that guys on this team seem to have defined roles, clearly defined roles. Andre Drummond, your goal is to be an absolute beast on the boards. 17 rebounds against the Pacers. Kelly Oubre, your goal is to be some form of a dynamic wing that can knock down a three but can also slash. He's doing that. Eric Gordon, we just need you to provide solid minutes at guard. Get us some points. He's doing that. Caleb Martin, let's see if you can contribute in a somewhat meaningful way, points-wise, but also be a guy who can clean up the glass. He's doing that. He's playing hard, tough basketball. That Heat culture, he's brought it with him from the South. Like, there are guys on this team that actually look like legitimate players. And then you start thinking about, you had a Paul George back in, you had a Joel Embiid back in. Now, all of a sudden, you're bringing two of those guys off the bench, whichever two they are. Like, obviously, Drummond will be the backup center. And then, I don't know who Paul George bumps. Maybe, does Oubre get bumped to the bench? Maybe. Does Caleb Martin end up being the guy who gets bumped to the bench? Maybe. But either way, that's a hell of a thing to have. You have Kyle Lowry who can run the second unit at point guard. It's a good team. Now, like, I know they're 1-2 on the season, but it's a good team. Now, I'm not even worried about the Joel Embiid thing. Like, I am and I'm not. But like, we all knew that there was a good chance he was going to miss time, right? Because it's just how it works. But if you can get Paul George back here healthy, and you can get consistent Paul George games, I want to see what it looks like to have Tyrese Maxey and Paul George playing together. Because that, I think, is like the most critical piece to this. We know that Joel Embiid can probably play well with Paul George. We know how he's looked with like decent enough wings. We know what he's looked like when he's had a solid guy like a Jimmy Butler in this lineup. We know the kind of shots that he's able to set up with his gravity for a guy like Tobias Harris who can't hit them. So I felt like that was all a positive. Like, genuinely, I think that it was a really good showing. It's a really good sign, potentially, that when you get Paul George back in the lineup, you need to see how he and Maxey play off one another. And that will give you probably a pretty decent idea of what it's going to look like when they get to put it together finally with Joel Embiid. So we don't have a ton to like dive into there because it's only been 3 games and you're only playing with one of your stars, but that star is starting to take the next positive step and look like the guy that we all kind of envisioned him being again this year. So that's a big positive. Now, the last thing, and this isn't going to be long, We are a week away from an election. I have one very simple request to all of the people who are out there. If you listen to the show, if you watch the show, do me a favor. Remember, we are all a lot more alike than we are different. Don't just actively hate people because they're not going to vote for the same person that you vote for. That's lazy kind of shit. That's the kind of thing that the weird machine, the weird two-party bullshit system wants you to believe in, is that you have to actively hate people who don't support the same people that you do. Some of you, when you go in to vote next week, are going to hit the button and you're just going to go right down one side. And some of you are going to go right down the other side. Now, do I like that kind of voting? I don't. I don't actually think that that's a great thing. Some of you, it's going to look like you're filling out an SAT where you're just like here, 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 and maybe you're like, oh, there's a libertarian here. I haven't seen that. Just fill in that bubble. Do your research. Look up these candidates. Go ahead. Vote for whoever you want to vote for. Go in, vote with a clear conscience, do the whole thing. But just remember that as you're driving past your neighbors' houses, if they have a sign for a candidate you support, all right, cool. And if it's somebody that you don't support, just remember that when the election's over, no matter what happens, no matter who wins at the local level, the state level, the county level, the national level, those people are still going to be your neighbors. So don't burn every relationship you have because you get staunchly entrenched on one side. It's my message to you. And maybe we'll talk about more on Friday. Maybe we'll talk about it a little bit on Tuesday. It'll be at the end of the show, so you can skip it if you're morally opposed to somebody saying anything about just trying not to be mean and not being awful to each other. I just request a little bit of common decency from people. Nico says, don't burn people's ballots. I did see that. That's crazy. There are like two things that I'm actively kind of looking at on a somewhat, well, there's that. There was the file. I forget where that was, but there was at least one ballot box that's been burned, which is not good, not ideal. I don't also know how those people get notified that their ballot, like that's its whole other thing. I genuinely don't know. Like if ballots have been burned, you can't exactly like turn around and then like go back to those people and say, hey, I know that you think you voted, but like your ballot's been burned. There's not really a way, to my knowledge, unless I know that they track who requests a ballot and who sends it back. So then maybe it becomes something like where the party has to reach out. I remember having to like, I remember this being a thing, but like maybe then the party has to reach out and say like, hey, it says that you requested a ballot, you didn't return it. Like it hasn't been counted. And then that person says, well, no, I sent it. And then maybe because of like what happened there, it's like, oh, well, your ballot must have been the one that was burned. And then you have to go out to the poll. I don't know. That's not ideal. There was another wacky thing. There was like a thing out in Lancaster County that apparently they're like investigating, like some kind of like ballot harvesting thing. And like they think that it might be happening in other counties. Well, on a local level, that's at least somewhat intriguing. Like, what the hell is going on? No. I don't know. Joe Papel says two-party BS is how they created their power, divided America. America is created by those in power. I just point back to the fact that like as much as we're told these two hate each other, they actively have worked together to avoid letting a third person on the stage at the presidential level. They actively work together on, what is it? It's the Commission on Debates or whatever, but it's like essentially the two parties. When RFK Jr., whatever you think of him, was like actually polling a decent enough number that he might have been able to be in a debate, they automatically were like, no, you know what? We're going to circumvent that whole thing and we'll set it up individually where it's just these, like, that's just not great. It's just not great. I don't even care how you feel about any of the candidates. I just think that's not great. I don't think it helps anybody. That's just me. I'm crazy. Chris Freed says voters can check if their ballot was received. Okay, there we go, Chris. That also then, in fairness though, that also does kind of fall back on the person who votes to have the motivation to actually do that. And now all of a sudden the onus falls back on that voter to check. But okay, it's good to know. Dersh says they have to contact the Board of Elections and vote on provisional and submit it. If their drop vote was salvaged, they'll drop the provisional ballot. It seems so complicated. We also probably won't know who wins next week. That'll be a whole other thing. Like we could, next Tuesday, I might be able to be like, hey, election day. And then Friday be like, hey, we still don't know who won. It's possible. Who knows? Landros says 3 parties in Canada is a shit show. I always point, I know it's not perfect, right? And you can't exactly compare things, apples to apples. Germany has a parliamentary system where there are like 15 different parties represented in parliament. I don't know. I think there's like a way to do it. But as of right now, the system's just kind of locked into 2 and it's kind of broken and they're not in any way, shape, or form incentivized to open it up to more than just those two. Jamie says, my county just released a list of people who had errors on the mail ballots in an effort to get them fixed. What kind of error do you have? Like, you voted for 2 presidents? Like, what the hell? How do you have an error? I'm really confused. Jamie says, don't forget Tuesday is also the NFL trade deadline on top of this. Jamie, you know what? We'll do an election day show where we'll talk about the NFL trade deadline. We'll see if the Eagles make any moves. I have seen that the Eagles have been involved in a bunch of rumors, but we will find out by next week if they actually get in on any of it. Kevin says he's voting early this week to avoid the lines. I actually think that's not a bad idea. My polling place got changed, so now I have to like kind of arrange how I'm going to get there. I'm going to drive there, but like the one that I typically would vote at is very close. I could walk there. This other one is not walkable. So I guess that would be my other thing. You know, if you're actively trying to like do the whole voting thing this year, if you're going to vote on election day, make sure that you double check where your polling place is because it might be different. Mine definitely changed. I don't remember actually getting a notice that it changed. I assume that they'll send one by Tuesday, but I found out from other people who live near me that it got moved. So I'd encourage any of you, however you're going to vote, make sure you double check where your polling place is. You're a week away or whatever. So Jamie says, it was missed. The mail-ins that were sent in that had errors, missed dates, and signatures were missing. That's not great. Joe says, at least the ads will stop polluting minds. I can't wait until we are done with the ads. Can I just say really, really quickly that, like, I get why people run the attack ads. I do. I understand it. I understand the psychology of it. But, like, I don't have a way, to my knowledge, that I can toggle off these commercials in any way, like when my kids are watching TV. And I'm sorry, but like when we're talking about some of the things and some of the words that we're using on these ads, and there's like little kids watching an Eagles game, and it's like, what is it? I'm not going to use all those terms, but you know, like there's the ads that run about illegal immigration, the kinds of people that are being let in, and there are certain words where it's like, that's not a word that we use in our house every day. What is that? And I'm like, well, I don't think that now's the time to have a conversation with a 4-year-old about consenting adults or not consenting. You know, you probably follow me. I'm just like, I don't know if that really should be on the TV at 1 o'clock on a Sunday with the kids on the regular TV. Maybe I'm crazy. I don't know. I'm just a little bit far gone now, guys. Maybe it's just me. All right, we're going to go. I will be back on Friday, 8:30. I will set the studio up in advance. We'll go live right at 8:30 on Friday. It's going to be a heck of a show. I might get a guest for Friday. I'm starting to think about rolling in the occasional guest on Friday episodes. And there are a couple of people that I've been talking about having come on this show, bring a little bit of fire, or bring a little bit of knowledge, or bring a little bit of fire and knowledge. So you'll have to check back in on Friday to see what I'm talking about. Or maybe it'll just be little old me and all of you wonderful people on YouTube, X, and Facebook. I want to thank all of you who tuned in. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell so you get notified whenever the show goes live. And if you haven't done so already, go over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a 5-star rating because that's helpful. But if you leave a 5-star review, that's even more helpful. And I'd greatly appreciate it. Don't forget to drive to 500 subscribers. Let's hit that 500 subscriber mark. And then somebody's going to win a jersey. And that's a great thing. And by the way, that's not an illegal thing. We could do that. Hit 500. Somebody gets a jersey. It's just how it works. It's a beautiful thing. So if you haven't done so already, please, seriously, go subscribe to the channel. And I'll give everybody a heads up. I think that people who have their subscription listed as private won't be able to, I can't pull their name into the collection. So I'll let people know, like, hey, we're going to do the randomizing of the list on this day. Flip your subscriptions to public for that day or whatever. And then I'll get you added into the spreadsheet and then I'll flip it back off. So, or if you're somebody who follows me on Twitter or Instagram or whatever, and you're like, hey, I don't want to make it private, but you send me a screenshot showing that you're subscribed and the name of your channel or your name, I'll add you to the list. If you're uncomfortable for whatever reason making your subscriptions public so I can pull your name into the list. So however we want to do it, it's totally fine. Anyway, I will be back very, very soon. In fact, I'll be back on Friday. I might hop on Crossing Broadcast Thursday, maybe. Snow the Goalie, we'll have an episode this week. Press Row Show, I won't be at the Halloween edition, but I've been told intern Andrew's going to dress like me. We got a lot of stuff going on this week. Everybody have a great rest of your week until Friday. And Landros, I don't know what to make of this, but Landros says you are the Elon Musk of Philly sports podcasts. I don't even know if I want to imagine what that begins, but I would certainly be happy to have that money. And on that, have a great day, everybody. I will talk to all of you Friday here on The Russ Joy Show. Have a great one.